A few weeks ago, I sat down for coffee with an old friend who had just returned from what he called a solo optimization retreat in Scandinavia. He was just glowing as he described the experience. 10 days in this high-tech cabin, zero human contact, governed entirely by an app that delivered his meals and tracked all his biometrics. It's the ultimate freedom, he told me, and he was leaning in with this really intense, almost frantic look in his eyes. No social friction, no family obligations, no noise. I finally decoupled myself from the collective. And to him, this was it. This was the pinnacle of modern life. The perfectly atomized individual, totally self-sufficient and, untethered from the burden of others. But then I asked him a simple, practical question. I said, who has your spare key? If you tripped in that cabin, who would have known? And his expression, it just shifted instantly. The glow faded, and it was replaced by this sudden, sharp flicker of anxiety. He realized that in his quest for total autonomy, he'd built a life where no one was actually looking for him. He had all the freedom in the world, yet he was effectively a ghost. He wasn't empowered, he was just alone. This whole interaction, it felt like a living, breathing case study for the 2026 Sociology of Leisure report that has recently sent these shockwaves through academic circles. The report offers what can only be described as a terminal diagnosis for Western society. It argues that our modern idea of leisure, this hyper-individualized digital isolation, isn't just a personal choice, it's a systemic vulnerability. What we've been calling personal liberty might actually be a freedom trap that is dissolving the very fabric of our civilization. While we spend our non-working hours in these solitary, algorithmically curated bubbles, we are inadvertently stretching our society of its tensile strength. We're turning a cohesive body politic into a powder of disconnected particles. It raises this haunting question. Can a society that has forgotten how to move together during its rest ever hope to stand together during a crisis? And why is it that a crowded, inefficient family festival on the other side of the globe might actually be a more potent strategic asset than any high-tech weapon or economic metric we possess? Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is a deep dive into the sources underpinning that 2026 Sociology of Leisure report. We are going to be analyzing the strategic, the economic, and the psychological consequences of this hyper-individualized leisure and the continuous 24/7 operational demand, and contrasting it sharply with models of collective social organization and rest found elsewhere.
And what's so fascinating here is how the sources frame this pursuit of absolute individual freedom, especially, during our non-work hours. It's not seen as a sign of societal strength, but as a systemic fracture.
Right.
We are examining how the dissolution of shared time and space, modern time and space, is actively dissolving social cohesion. The report suggests the body politic is turning into a powder of disconnected particles, and that the search for what we call personal liberty has, maybe inadvertently, become our greatest vulnerability.
It really boils down to this idea that if we can't find time to rest together, we eventually forget how to live together. All right, so let's start with the central concept that seems to dominate modern life. 204/7. It sounds so simple, right? A declaration of infinite availability, a pledge of service. But the source material argues this phrase is actually, it's a static redundancy. It's a kind of linguistic trick.
It's much deeper than just availability.
Yeah.
The sources see 24/7 as this profound, almost philosophical indifference to human rhythm.
Indifference to rhythm. What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's an attempt to create a time of indifference that completely disavows its relation to the rhythmic, the periodic, the seasonal textures of human life. I mean, think about it. A day is defined by night. A year is defined by its seasons. A work week is defined by the weekend. But 247 tries to flatten all of that into an uninflected, endless loop.
So it's a schema of a week, but it's been totally extracted from any real cumulative human experience.
Precisely.
And what's the real world consequence of this insistence on ceaselessness? The report states that this perpetual operation demands permanent expenditure and endless wastefulness. I have to admit, I've always just thought of 247 as convenience, but the sources link it explicitly to ecological breakdown.
And that link is absolutely crucial. A 247 existence is structurally inseparable from environmental catastrophe.
How so?
Precisely because it entails a terminal disruption of the cycles and seasons that ecological integrity depends on. The system requires continuous, unlimited performance, which by definition aligns itself with what is, inanimate, inert, or unaging.
Like a machine.
Exactly like a machine. If you look at our energy grids, they have to constantly maintain these massive reserves in infrastructure just to handle peak demands at all times of day and night.
So we're perpetually running everything at a higher baseline than we actually need.
Yes. Just to ensure that theoretical availability is met. It's waste built right into the design of the infrastructure itself.
So what you're saying is that the core capitalist demand, that we must always be able to consume or produce or access something that dictates a wasteful operational model for society as a whole.
Exactly. And the historical roots for this go back way earlier than the digital age. The historian Wolfgang Schivelbusch documented this in his Social History of Light.
Right.
He mapped how the broad deployment of urban streetlights in the 19th century wasn't just about safety.
So the illumination of the nighttime, it reduced those long-standing anxieties about darkness, sure.
But more importantly, it expanded the time frame and thus the profitability of economic activities. The elimination of the night was this huge symbolic demonstration of what capitalism promised: security, opportunity, and increased prosperity.
And the key distinction here, which the report really hammers home, is who benefits now. While that earlier project might have promised to improve the fabric of social existence for everyone, the triumphant installation of the 247 world today is a fulfillment of that project. But the disproportionate benefits and sustained prosperity accrue mainly to a powerful global elite.
Yes. The cost, the exhaustion, the waste, the social fragmentation that gets distributed across the entire population.
Which sets up this existential conflict with our most basic, unexploitable human necessity: sleep.
And the sources frame sleep as being fundamentally incompatible with the demands of a 247 universe. It's described as a profound human affront to contemporary capitalism.
An affront, because it subsists as an uncompromising interruption of what they call the theft of time. It is truly remarkable how successfully contemporary capitalism has co-opted most of our other human needs and desires. I mean, hunger, thirst, sexual desire, even the need for friendship.
They've all been remade into commodified or financialized forms. We buy gourmet meals, specialized water, dating apps, self-help guides for social connections.
But sleep
remains this incongruous anomaly. It's a major site of crisis for the system. Despite immense resources being poured into sleep science researching duration, quality, dreams, the stunning reality is that nothing of direct economic value can be extracted from the act of sleeping itself.
So it frustrates every strategy to exploit it or reshape it for profit.
It does. It's this ubiquitous but unseen reminder of a natural pre-modern rhythm that has never been fully exceeded. It's still tied to the rhythmic oscillations of solar light and darkness. It asserts our biological limitation.
And yet the system works relentlessly to chip away at that barrier. The data is shocking. Over the course of the 20th century, we see these steady cumulative inroads made against the time we dedicate to rest.
It's a massive shift. The average North American adult now sleeps approximately 6.5 hours a night.
6.5, and that's down from what, 10 hours?
Down dramatically from 10 hours in the early 20th century. That's nearly a 35% reduction in less than a century.
Wow. And this erosion is even reflected in our language, right? Especially around technology.
Oh, absolutely. The machine-based designation of sleep mode is so telling.
How so?
It remakes the larger organic sense of human sleep into simply a deferred or diminished condition of operationality and access. It supersedes the fundamental binary of an off-on logic.
Meaning nothing is ever really off anymore.
And nothing is ever off. You're merely in a lower power state, ready to be immediately activated. Sleep is reconceptualized as a variable, a manageable function, not an absolute biological need.
And the military-industrial complex is working hard to eliminate this inefficiency entirely, moving from managing sleep to eradicating the need for it.
Right, and the quest for perpetual functioning is rooted in military research. The sources point to the U.S. Defense Department's studying the white-crowned sparrow.
Sarah, right. What's so special about it?
It's an astonishing example. This is a species that can stay awake for up to 7 days during migration, flying and navigating by night and foraging by day without any rest.
7 days.
7 days. And the government-funded research is using neurochemicals, gene therapy, and transcranial magnetic stimulation. The goal here is profound. It's to reduce the human body's need for sleep, not just to stimulate temporary wakefulness.
That's genuinely terrifying. The military is trying to eliminate the very thing that makes us human, our dependence on rest.
The end goal is the creation of the sleepless soldier, a combatant whose physical capabilities will more closely approximate the functionalities of non-human apparatuses and networks.
And the aim is for soldiers to go for a minimum of 7 days without sleep while preserving high levels of mental and physical performance.
And we can't ignore the dark side of this research. There's a direct connection between the quest for sleeplessness and its operational use as a weapon.
You mean sleep deprivation as a form of torture?
It's a documented method of torture. a calculated, systematic shattering of the individual through external force. In facilities referred to as dark sites, post-2001 detainees were deprived of sleep for prolonged periods. They were often confined in tiny cubicles, lit with high-intensity lamps, and blasted with loud, repetitive music.
And this systematic denial of rest, it's designed to break a person's neurological and psychological integrity. The sources trace the use of this back to Stalin's police in the 1930s.
Yes, confirming its capacity to quickly produce psychosis, neurological damage, and render the victim compliant. It is the ultimate weapon of the 2047 world, the forced elimination of our last biological boundary.
Okay, so let's transition from this philosophical and military context to the economic mechanism. How does this 24/7 operational demand systematically break down the social structure?
This is where we get into the work of Harriet Presser, who actually coined the term 247 economy. Her research statistically validates Karl Polanyi's argument that unregulated market forces are fundamentally disruptive to the social fabric.
Polanyi's core insight was that treating labor, land, and money as just commodities, as pure market mechanisms, will inevitably destroy the very society that relies on them.
And Presser's work shows how the shift to 247 working hours is the modern instantiation of that disruption. Non-standard work, so anything outside the traditional 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. workday or weekends, it's no longer an anomaly for emergencies.
It's now integral to how the economy functions.
Exactly.
And where do we see this work concentrated?
It's overwhelmingly in the service sector that supports the 24/7 machine. You're looking at cashiers, truck drivers, sales workers, cooks, registered nurses, and so on. These are the people who keep the lights on, the logistics flowing, and the services available at all hours.
But the economic mechanism of this fragmentation is, well, the report describes it as uniquely cruel, and this is where the details get truly shocking.
They really do. Despite the undesirability of non-standard hours, the personal costs of disrupted family life, of isolation workers on these shifts, who represent the most disadvantaged segments of the U.S. population, are paid approximately 10% less than their standard counterparts.
Wait, I have to stop you there. That completely contradicts the idea of a free market compensating for inconvenience. You would expect a premium for working those antisocial hours?
You would.
But the sources show a penalty. Why? Why would they be paid less?
Because of the structural disadvantage of these segments. This financial disincentive forces the less well-educated and lower-paid workers into patterns that maximize social disruption, precisely because they lack the bargaining power to demand better wages or stable hours.
So the 2047 world doesn't pay a premium for disruption.
It exploits the necessity of the working poor to take any shift that's available.
And this exploitation leads directly to the collapse of what the report calls social synchronization.
Correctly. Non-standard work schedules result in significant family disruption and dramatically higher rates of separation and divorce.
There's a specific data point, isn't there?
Yes. For instance, men with children who had been married less than 5 years were more than 6 times more likely to divorce if they worked night shifts compared to standard day shifts.
6 times? That's staggering.
Furthermore, these non-standard schedules are frequently necessitated by the lack of universal quality childcare. Parents are forced to work opposite shifts to cover care for their children, a strategy often called staggered parenting.
But this creates a profound social and psychological disruption. One parent has to provide care while they simultaneously need to be sleeping. It collapses the rhythmic balance between work, rest, and relational life.
It completely collapses it.
So the economic reality of the 247 economy is the systemic erosion of synchronized rest periods. It shatters the communally shared interval of sleep and restoration for huge segments of the population. My friend in Scandinavia was searching for the solo optimization of his life, but for millions of people, this atomization isn't a choice. It's an economic consequence enforced by low wages and non-standard hours.
That's the core of it, yeah.
And this widespread social and economic fracture provides the necessary context for the rise of what the sources are calling the loneliness engine, the atomistic society.
To really understand this, we need to clearly define the terms used by Ferdinand Tönnies, the sociologist who articulated the difference between the organic community, or Gemeinschaft, and the atomistic society, Gesellschaft.
Okay, let's make sure we ground this jargon for everyone. Tönnies saw Gemeinschaft, the organic community, as the kind of social organization you'd find in, say, a rural village, a tight-knit family, or an institution like the medieval church. What's the defining feature of that model?
The defining feature is the ideal unity of the whole. The group is primary. Relations are intrinsic, which means they are valuable in and of themselves, and members are mutually interdependent, like organs in a body.
So happiness lies in the polis, the shared civic space.
Exactly. As Aristotle argued, a person apart from society is either a beast or a god, but not fully human. In this model, social actions are determined by your functional role. You are a son, a farmer, a priest, and freedom is conceived as doing as one should in order to promote the good of the whole community.
Duties prevail over individual rights.
Fundamentally, yes.
And what's the risk associated with that organic model?
Well, the strength of that unity is offset by its danger. If an individual doesn't conform, they can be severely punished by exclusion or ostracism from that communal life. Conformity is the price of belonging.
Okay, now contrast that sharply with Gesellschaft, the atomistic society.
Right.
This sounds a lot more like the world we live in now.
It is the model that is perfectly represented by the 19th century Industrial Revolution, or, Thomas Hobbes' State and Leviathan. The social body is composed of interchangeable independent parts, or atoms.
Quantitative units, each sufficient unto itself.
Yes, and relations are essentially regarded as contractual, external, legalistic, and formalistic. The focus is on legal rules over functional rules.
So the individual is seen as completely self-sufficient, motivated by egoistic self-interest. Freedom is just doing as one pleases.
And rights are emphasized over duties to the whole. That's the key shift.
If we look at contemporary American society, it seems overwhelmingly organized along these atomistic and contractual principles. It strikes me that this is precisely what Alexis de Tocqueville observed when he visited the United States back in the 1830s.
Tocqueville was remarkably prophetic. He noted that equality, paradoxically, isolates and weakens men because it deprives each individual of the help of his neighbors.
So when everyone is equally independent, everyone retreats into themselves. We rely on abstract systems rather than on personal human connections.
Yes.
And the pervasive nature of this contractualism is so evident in our daily life, as the sources point out. When we have disputes with our neighbors, we call the police. We rely on an external legal force rather than working things out relationally.
Or, when there are employment issues, we seek impartial arbitration. We use legal contracts and formal agreements to govern relationships that used to be held together by mutual trust and relational duties.
The intimacy of human relationships has been replaced by the rigidity of legal process.
And even within the family structure, this plays out tragically. Today, the individual parent's right to happiness often supersedes the duty to the nuclear family or the extended kin.
So this atomized pursuit of personal satisfaction, often facilitated by easy divorce or geographical mobility, it leads to a mechanistic production of fragmented youth.
Yes, you mentioned latchkey kids, runaway kids, throwaway kids. These categories speak to a deep emotional distance, not just a physical one.
They're suffering from an increasing awareness of separation. They know their security hinges on a contract, a relationship that can be dissolved when it no longer serves one party's self-interest.
That spare key your friend was missing. It symbolizes the lack of that deep organic accountability.
And the institutional response to social problems is just as fragmented and contractual, which seems to make matters worse.
The sources highlight a really stark contrast here. The war on poverty in the 1960s, for example, initiated programs like Head Start, which used a much more organic, comprehensive approach. It fostered togetherness and belonging by nurturing human attachments between parents, children, and teachers.
And the outcome was that Head Start children, while they weren't always academically superior in the long run, had significantly lower dropout rates.
Why?
Because they experienced a feeling of profound belonging and security at a critical stage. The benefit was relational, not just academic.
And today, we've shifted toward contract-based therapeutic services. Modern child protective systems, for instance, often rely on behavioral contracts that fail entirely to address the core loneliness and dependency of abusive or struggling parents.
They substitute scientific procedures and quick fixes for painstaking care and human attachments.
Right, and I see the issue. If someone is emotionally dependent, maybe because they weren't nurtured developmentally, expecting them to suddenly adhere to an external, artificial behavioral contract is it's unrealistic.
Precisely. The report suggests that these parents haven't developmentally reached the stage of autonomy where a contract is even meaningful. They're atomized, isolated, and often more inclined to depend on external escapes like drugs and alcohol than on standardized contractual treatment plans.
So the system demands autonomy from individuals who desperately need connection.
And this atomization is relentlessly reinforced by the 204-7 system we discussed earlier. The sources argue that the illusion of choice and autonomy is a foundation of this system, which in reality enforces a kind of compulsory labor of self-management.
We're so busy managing the means of life, not the content of life.
What do you mean by that?
We are constantly preoccupied with managing the technical conditions of our lives. Delivery, display, storage, upgrades, accessories, subscriptions.
We spend our non-working hours solving technical problems created by the constant operational demands of our devices and our networks.
And this perpetual task management prevents genuine reflection on life or sustained work toward any kind of common future. The relentless focus is placed on enhancing our operational and performative capabilities, optimizing the self, rather than nurturing the content of life or the shared world.
This hyper-management reinforces a phantasmic digital insularity against what the source beautifully calls the shoddiness and insufficiency of a world in common.
And any sociality outside of that relentless individual self-interest becomes inexorably depleted. It's a self-reinforcing engine. The more self-reliant we try to become, the more fragile our genuine social connections get, and the more we have to rely on transactional systems that only deepen the atomization.
The systemic fracture caused by this atomization and the 204/7 demand leads us to analyze the differences in how entire societies cope or fail to cope with non-work time. And this brings us to the core strategic insight of the 2026 report: the stark contrast between Eastern and Western models of leisure policy.
This is where the sociological analysis really becomes geopolitical. The report argues that the strategic divergence between Western atomized leisure as a symptom of civilizational decadence and the Eastern model of collective rest is a vital mechanism for maintaining social fabric and national mobilization capacity.
Okay, let's break down the cultural dimensions first. In Western nations, the US, the UK, most of Europe leisure policy is shaped by its ingrained individualistic culture. We see policy largely managed by nonprofit and commercial organizations.
So what does that prioritize? It prioritizes specialized consumer industries like competitive sports, individualistic self-improvement programs, and facilities tailored for special groups like women, children, the disabled.
So leisure is a customized, highly segmented market experience. You choose your hobby, your gym, your yoga retreat, all totally disconnected from your neighbor's choice.
Exactly. Whereas in stark contrast, Eastern nations like China, Japan, and Korea, which reflect their traditional collectivism and high power distance, demonstrate a dominant role of government in defining leisure.
So the government's role is not just to provide facilities, but to ensure collective benefit and reinforce national identity.
Yes. Policy focuses heavily on cultural heritage protection, national festivals, and large-scale cultural tourism like supporting trips to Wudang Mountain or the Confucius Cultural Festival. The goal is a shared national experience.
And this state-led organization of rest is identified by the report as a direct mechanism for reinforcing collective resilience. How does that practically manifest?
It manifests through synchronization. The government modifies holiday systems to align with local and traditional festivals, thereby encouraging mass synchronization of rest periods.
The most famous example is China's Golden Week, right?
Exactly, which was established through the adjustment of statutory holidays. By encouraging the entire populace to rest and travel together, the state is intentionally investing in a shared social experience.
So, the erosion of synchronized rest in the Western gig economies, which we talked about earlier, leads to the collapse of social cohesion. Meanwhile, this state-led infrastructure reinforces collective resilience and intergenerational stability in the East.
That is the precise argument. The report emphasizes the correlation between high-density public infrastructure investment, whether that's in parks, festivals, or cultural sites, and the preservation of industrial human capital through organized leisure.
And this is viewed as a superior alternative to the fragmented social structures of the post-industrial West.
It is.
This provides the full strategic context for the opening anecdote. That crowded, potentially inefficient family festival is viewed as a potent strategic asset because collective shared rest maintains social fabric and enhances national mobilization capacity by fostering a sense of shared belonging and mutual recognition.
When people rest together, they reaffirm their identity as a unified population.
Whereas in the West, the atomized, individualized pursuit of leisure leads directly to competitive waiting and intensified resentment.
That's a great way to put it. When millions of atomized individuals suddenly decide to seek their highly personalized leisure experience at the same time, whether it's skiing, flying, or driving, you get social friction.
You get traffic jams, airport lines, competitive reservation systems.
Precisely. And in this atomistic context, the privilege of the elite is defined by never having to wait. They buy their way out of synchronization.
So for the general population, attempts at synchronized leisure result in an experience of intense competition, where everyone is fighting for scarce, shared intervals of time, which further destroys any sense of community.
Right.
Now, we have to highlight that the sources caution against treating this east-west divergence as a rigid moral binary.
Yes, that's a really important caveat. Simply contrasting and judging pairs of opposites is actually described as a typically Western approach, which often implies that Eastern values are inherently superior or more spiritual.
And the irony is rich. We often see Westerners romanticize Eastern practices as these purely spiritual escapes from modern materialism.
But if you dig into the history, the boundaries are completely blurred. Modern yoga, for example, which is widely seen as purely Eastern, heavily relies on early 20th century European gymnastics, calisthenics, and bodybuilding methodologies.
And the ideology driving contemporary yoga, this obsession with athleticism, visible body shape, and optimized health metrics, is strongly aligned with the Western individualistic concept of healthism, not traditional spiritualism.
It's an optimized, performative form of relaxation. It fits perfectly into that solo optimization paradigm we started with.
Right.
Furthermore, the collectivism stereotype is undermined by significant local variation. Studies show that local social factors, things like specific trades such as farming or herding, shape social thought and interdependence more directly than these broad cultural sweeps.
So the cultural labels often fail to capture this complexity.
They do.
Can you give us a concrete example of that local variation?
Certainly. Take Hokkaido, Japan. Due to its history of colonization and frontier settlement, citizens there are sometimes seen as the Wild West of Japan. They exhibit a highly independent and individualistic temperament and use a more analytic cognitive style than mainland Japanese, who are generally more holistic and collectivistic.
So this confirms that the minds of people in the East and West are not fundamentally wired differently. We are all capable of both analytic and holistic thought.
We're better off recognizing and cultivating cognitive flexibility rather than relying on cultural stereotypes.
And finally, we have to acknowledge the inherent vulnerabilities created by strict collectivism. It's not a utopian solution.
Far from it. The pressure to conform in homogeneous Eastern societies can be intense. This leads to unforgiving attitudes toward those who are different, like members of the LGBT community or those who deviate from traditional family roles, particularly around filial duty and marriage expectations.
And there is also the significant social pressure created by intense, sometimes brutal, competition for face.
Yes, this is visible particularly in China and India, where status is often measured publicly by comparing children's careers, income, and spouses.
So the application of collectivism in practice can, ironically, create its own specific kind of internal loneliness and competition based on enforced external comparison.
It's a kind of collective atomization where individuals are striving to optimize their unit status within the larger group.
We've established that loneliness and atomization are generated intrinsically by the structure of the 24/7 society and contractual living. And it's not primarily, the internet research shows, the quality and quantity of Americans' relationships are about the same as they were before the internet even existed. So if the problem is structural and systemic, where do we look for remedies? If the freedom trap is real, how do we escape it?
We have to look to what the sources call social infrastructure.
Social infrastructure.
The physical places, the organizations, and the institutions that shape how people interact. Or, as sociologists put it, places that allow for genuine accidental encounters to occur.
I think it's useful to draw a clear contrast between historical investment in this infrastructure and the contemporary neglect we see. Andrew Carnegie's funding of 2,811 lending libraries across the country is cited in the report as this powerful example of past philanthropic investment in public life.
And those libraries weren't just places to read, they were civic centers designed for shared public education and interaction.
Right, so compare that historical model with contemporary tech giants.
The sources point out that in Silicon Valley, massive expansion often displaces poor, working class, and middle class residents who are priced out, yet the companies fail to make comparable reinvestment in public life or genuine social infrastructure.
So the development of technology that relies on publicly funded communication infrastructure is not resulting in an equivalent reinvestment in the public sphere that sustains community. The wealth generated is atomizing, not communal.
Exactly. And the danger, according to Teresa Caldero's analysis, is the rise of exclusive social infrastructures, most visibly gated communities.
And Caldera's assessment is that while these systems protect those who can afford them and fulfill that atomistic desire for control and safety,
they actively weaken democracy and deepen social divisions. They are specifically designed to prevent the spontaneous, accidental interaction and necessary social friction that builds community and civic understanding between different groups.
so the focus for a remedy has to shift toward improving places rather than solely punishing people. Most policies designed to reduce crime or address social malaise focus entirely on punishing individual behavior.
Right, rather than improving the social infrastructure of their environments, even though environments fundamentally shape choices and civic life.
This brings us back to those crucial examples of effective social infrastructure.
Think about Iceland's public pools, which are subsidized and open year-round. They successfully unite people across economic and social divides. Everyone, from teenagers to retirees to politicians, mixes in the hot tubs.
It's an unintentional yet powerful mechanism for shared experience and trust building.
Similarly, safe spaces like the Black Barbershop or local community centers serve as these valuable, often underappreciated resources that diversify and enrich civic life by providing a place for essential mixed group relationships and difficult conversations to happen organically rather than contractually.
So all of this points back to the fundamental need to recover what the sources call time in common.
And this requires rhythmic patterns of action and pause, sharing, reciprocity, and cooperation behaviors based on the model of taking turns.
And that model is completely at odds with the competitive, hyper-efficient ethos of 21st century capitalism.
Completely. This reminds me of the foundational thinking of George Herbert Mead, the American philosopher and sociologist. His theory argues that the constitutive elements of human society are not competition and self-interest,
but neighborliness, helpfulness, and cooperation values based on the fundamental attitude of helping the other person who is down.
That's right. Mead suggests that these values are not peripheral. They are the engine of a genuine society. They clash directly with the competitive ethos and the contractual mentality of modern capitalism, which seeks to turn every encounter into a transaction.
And cooperation requires trust, which is destroyed by universal competition.
Which brings us to the importance of waiting. In the 247 world, waiting is viewed as wasted time, and inefficiency to be minimized at all costs.
But the sources argue that recovering the suspended unproductive time of waiting, or taking turns, is inseparable from cooperation and mutuality. When we in the West experience waiting those traffic jams, the airport lines, it intensifies resentment.
And it highlights the failure of the system to serve everyone equally. It's a reminder of a forced, resented communality.
Exactly.
Contrast that with the portrayal of waiting by figures like the filmmaker Chantal Akerman, documenting life in Eastern Europe. She showed waiting as an act essential to the tentative possibility of community.
A silent, tacit acceptance of time shared in common.
Yes, a suspension of individual urgency in favor of a shared rhythm. That shared pause affirms collective human dependence, which is the very thing the solo optimization mindset seeks to deny.
In essence, the report argues we need to recover the ability to be comfortably dependent on one another, even in the smallest moments like waiting in line, rather than constantly striving for the impossible goal of absolute self-sufficiency. To bring this complex deep dive full circle, we see the profound contradiction at the heart of the 24/7 system and the atomistic society. The modern pursuit of absolute individual freedom, the solo optimization retreat, the desire to have no social friction results not in empowerment, but in acute loneliness and systemic vulnerability, because it actively dissolves the organic connections and shared time necessary for mutual support and collective resilience. My friend realized he had all the freedom in the world, but no one who cared enough to have his spare key.
And the profound lesson from the sources is that sleep remains the last enduring natural condition that capitalism has failed to annex completely. It is the ultimate example of abandonment to the care of others. As solitary and private as it seems, sleep is not yet severed from an interhuman tracery of mutual support and trust. It affirms the necessity of postponement, the deliberate pause in performance, and the possibility of renewal, a quality entirely incompatible with the ceaseless demands and, frankly, the deathliness of the 247 world. It remains a temporary absence containing a bond to a future, where something unforeseen might happen upon awakening, trusting that the world you left behind will be there to greet you when you open your eyes.